Hello everyone, welcome to the Dev Method. I'm Ricky. Today we're going to talk all about optionals. So if you haven't taken a look at optionals yet, you probably actually haven't even taken a look at Swift because they are everywhere and they're used all the time in iOS. And today we're going to talk about breaking down what they actually do and what they mean so that you can conceptually understand when you're using them how to maybe better optimize your code readability. Also handle edge cases that you might not have handled before. And then also some tips and tricks toward the end so that we can kind of take the ease off of handling optionals because they're not always easy to deal with and it requires you to think to get through them. So looking at our first example we have here, the meaning of an optional. So I want to just point out a couple of things here that we see on the screen. So one of the things is a missing number value. And how would you use this? Well, there's the object here, declare it as optional, and then inside the angle brackets is what you put the concrete type. In this case, it's just an integer, so we put int there. And then that's then represented as this local variable, which is missing value. It doesn't have to always be a local variable. It could also be a property in your class or in your struct. And if you want to initialize it, you use the assignment operator here. And in this case, what we're saying is that this is a missing number value. It is constant, and that's why it's with the let, and then it's assigned to nil. So that means it'll never be not nil. Taking a look at the next one, this is possibly missing a number value. And I say possibly because the assignment does say that it's 2. But because we mark it with an optional, the meaning is to say that this value here might not actually always be there, or you don't know that it's there. So this assignment part here, if you want to maybe not look at that for just a moment, say it just came in like so, you don't necessarily know what that value is, if it is optional or if it is not. And just so you get an idea, the optional here is actually declared as an enum. So two ways to dig deeper into what this optional is here. If you hold down option and then hover over the optional word and then you click on it, you'll get a huge summary, all these different examples. We're going through some of these examples right now today, but this is another way to review optionals. Another thing you could do is Control-Command-J, and that will jump to definition and actually shows the interface of an optional with some of the documentation all written inside. So that description that we saw a moment ago, it's all listed right here. And it's got all the correct terms so that you can read about them online and understand what those correct terms are actually mean when it says like an unconditional unwrapping. So we're gonna look at all those things. But the first thing here that I want you to get through to you is the optional. It really stands for two different cases, and that's why it's expressed as an enum. We have none, meaning it's not there. So when we assigned it to nil, that variable, that means it's a dot sum. That's the case. Now, or I'm sorry, it's a dot none, and that's the case. So if it has something, which is the second one here, possibly missing a number value, but then if we do know that there's something in there, that's because we got the dot sum from it. So let me show you what that looks like. You might have seen switch statements before. So let me write one real quick. So we'll do a switch statement with possible missing value. And we have two cases we have to satisfy for the Swift compiler. The first one is none. So when it is not there, say number value missing. And then the next one is sum. And then because it uses generics, that wrapped value, it knows that it's an integer because that's how it was declared here. So now we say number, and we say print, found this wrapped value number, and then you could print it out here. So that's what that's saying. That would actually satisfy all the exhaustive cases for this switch statement here, given this value. So I'll play this up to here to this point so you can see what that looks like. found this value. Now let's change it to the one that's missing. Let's play it again. So we definitely know that this one's missing, and therefore, yeah, the switch statement actually did help us with that. So that's our first part of optionals, just understanding its meaning. Now let's go a little bit further. In order to introduce the next example, I actually have a couple of types that I introduced because I want to see how things work together with optionals. So the first thing, just as real quick type to learn is a feeling. That feeling could be joy, sleepy, hungry, or sick. And then it also has its own special function that it can call, and that returns some sort of emoji depending on the feeling that itself is. Then I have a quick method here called print the feeling, and that's simply a wrapper around the print statement that Swift has, and we're just going to print the feeling and the emoji that goes with it. So these feelings are actually part of the food. So the idea here with food is that the result of eating a food is going to give us some sort of feeling. And that's the idea. So I have a class here, listed below, that's going to use that. And I've made 4 different foods, all expressed with different feelings. So the first one is candy, the next one is a small treat, and then we have a full bowl, and then an empty bowl. And those are our different foods. So given a class dog, let's say the dog keeps track of a current feeling. So whatever it last ate, that is its current feeling. Now we have the eat method, and given food, it keeps track of what the food result would be. So depending on what kind of food it is, it could be a sick feeling, a hungry feeling, a joyful feeling, or sleepy. And then it's actually going to return the feeling for us. So let's just say we have a dog here. Dog's name is Andrew. And the idea with this one is that we have Andrew, and then we want to get the current feeling, right? So you see how it has here current feeling with a question mark? Yeah, so let me show you what this actually means. So let's just say X equals that current feeling. So far from what I've shown, and this might be review for some of you, is that if we wanted to explicitly declare the type of what we're getting back, it would be an optional feeling. But another way to express that is actually this question mark syntax here. So this could have been like so, right? Optional feeling. Now, here's the problem. If we want to express it like this, it actually has to have some sort of value associated with it, so we'd actually have to say none. So we have syntactic sugar in Swift, meaning like helpful little shorthands with our optionals. So this one would be what I had declared here before, and that is the same thing, and that is the equivalent. So in saying that it's an optional of a feeling and it's assigned to a .none case, we just say that it's a feeling with a question mark. So that's as easy as it can get for declaring optionals on your property types or even your local variables. So the next thing here, I don't have to necessarily declare it like so. I could just say that it's a feeling like this. And there we go. Now I have my feeling and I can do something with it. Now here's the thing, that feeling when it first runs, it's actually going to be nil. Okay, we see that on the right-hand side here. So that feeling is nil, but now let's just say Andrew eats another food. Let's give him a full bowl. And then let's actually see what the current feeling is. I'm going to take this part out here. So the current feeling first started as nil. Then we eat something. We should have a current feeling that's not nil after that. So here it is, sleepy again, right? So if we were to do this, let's go back, feeling, question mark. And we want to declare the next thing here too. We still have, even though we know that there's a feeling there, we still actually have to put the question mark there. And that's because from this point of view, we actually don't know, if we didn't know this class dog and how it worked, we don't necessarily know if that current feeling is there, because it's always declared as an optional. So no matter what, it could always be set back to nil, or it could produce a none case. So that's why we always need this here. We can't necessarily do this because now we know that it's there. That just doesn't work. So that's the safety that's built into Swift in order to help you deal with a value that could be there or could not be there. So we always have to have it like so. And because of type inference, meaning we don't have to declare what the type is, if I do option click on the Y, I can see that, yeah, it's got that optional feeling there. So that's the syntactic sugar part. So let's go a little deeper now into optionals. So I have another one here. Number B, number C, can do something like this, right? Now here's another one here too. Let's just say we wanted a string. And we have an integer, oh, I'm sorry, not a string. We want an integer, but we're going to initialize it with some sort of a string, like so. Here it's saying it has to be optional, right? So there we go. That works. So even though 3 was a literal, this initializer for an integer doesn't always come out to be what you might expect, because if we did something like, well, I don't know, put a letter in there, that actually will produce a nil value. So let me play it up to that point just so you can see. There it is. Yeah. So yeah, another example of the syntactic sugar. So let's move on now to unsafely unwrapping an optional. So I have another dog, Arik. Now Arik, we want to print out its feelings. So remember we have this print feeling that we could do here, but it needs a feeling. So if we did Arik dot current feeling, okay? Now we're gonna get an error here because the type that the feeling is expecting is actually a non-nil feeling. And so the current feeling here from a dog is actually an optional feeling. I'll just show you that again in the autocomplete. See, it's got that question mark, so it's saying it's optional. So how do you convert something that's optional into something that's not optional? And we actually have another syntactic sugar that we could use, and that's the exclamation point, also known as the bang operator. And what that does is that it says, okay, if you know something's there, we're gonna take off the safety and we're gonna let you access that value. Now, if the value happens not to be there, it's not gonna be a compile time error, meaning it's not gonna be an error you see in your code editor with the red exclamation point saying, okay, something's wrong here. It's gonna say like, okay, you know what you're doing. We're gonna go ahead and compile the application for you into a binary, and then when you run it, you still might have issues, but if you don't, then great, you knew what you were doing. But if you have issues after that, then yeah, you actually made a mistake. So watch this, if I play it up to this point, we will have an error. So this is a runtime error, and the runtime errors are a lot more cryptic than the compile time errors. They're not as, I would say, like user-friendly or legible. So here we have an error, execution was interrupted, here's the reason, it's a bad exec instruction, process has been left at a point, yada yada, stuff, yeah. So what it's saying is essentially you've unwrapped the optional, you've taken off the safety, and you said that there should be a value there, but at runtime it found that there wasn't. So that's unsafely wrapping the optional. Now here's the thing, if I am fixing this as an error, I'll say, okay, like I'll give it a small treat. So I give Arik, the dog, a small treat. Now I run this again, we actually should be just fine. So now when I give Arik a small treat, he has a feeling of joy. So that's the idea. And we've unwrapped it, but we've unsafely done it. So as you can see, there's an order here. I had to make sure that the value was set in order for me to safely unwrap it and let the program continue without any errors. So this is good to know. This is actually really great to use when, let's say, you want to check for a value being there. So like, for example, if you wanted to see if the value is there, you could say if, I'll just say my feeling, So the feeling, oh wait, arc. So if arc.current feeling is not equal to nil, now you want to print it, print a feeling with arc.current feeling with the exclamation point. So this line is saying check to see if it's nil or not nil in this case. And then if it's not, then I know I can unwrap it. So that's an option, you could do that. So this type of code I rarely see in projects, and I actually stay away from this type of code. I use something different, which is safely unwrapping the optionals. So I want to show you that part next. So let me bring this up just a little bit here. So let's just say this, put this over here. Another way to express this, to safely unwrap the optional, this is kind of safe, I would say. It's like an in-between. But to really unwrap it safely, we use an if-let statement. So let's just repeat the same code we had before. But instead of checking for nil, let's use Swift to help us out here. We do want the value here. So we're going to say the value, if let value equals arc current feeling, then this will run, right? So here's the thing, that value that it's given to you, you can actually use that. So you don't have to say that not nil here, you could just do the if let, and then you're assigning a value to it. Now it's saying if Swift finds something that is there, and it's checking at runtime if it's there, but also the compiler is helping you beforehand to make sure that it is safely not nil. I have a feeling now, and the value is this new local variable. This variable will be in scope just for this entirety here. So value will not be out here. See, if I type in value here, the compiler is actually not going to know what it is, and it's going to say, hey, it's an unresolved identifier, meaning this is not found. But we do have a warning. It's saying that value is defined but never used. So what you would really want to put here for this print of feeling is actually something like this. So now let's just say I give it a different name, arcs non-nil current feeling. So that value there then goes into here, like so. So that would be safely unwrapping that optional. So that's very common to do. Now, if you don't find it, you can also add an else on here. This part itself, you don't have to do, but you want to say something like, okay, print the feeling, but because I couldn't find the feeling, you just give it, I don't know, sleepy, print the feeling, because you got to do something with the feeling. And if it's not there, then you do some sort of like default behavior. There's a couple of other ways to handle this, but we'll look at it a little bit later. So here's another thing we could do. Let's say we want to help ourselves with this idea that a feeling could be there or could not be there, or this optional value could not be there. So there's what's known, instead of the if-let, there's a guard-let. So I'm going to write it in a couple different ways, but I want to first show you how to use the guard-let first. So this is one way to write it, and I'll call number 2 here. And then if I said if let here, and then go up here. See how that moved around? So these two implementations are essentially the same thing. Now, there, I think, is an advantage to readability for one or the other. The guard statement is really checking to see if there's some sort of value that you can safely unwrap. So feeling here, if it's safely unwrapped, then it'll continue in the current context. So not in this else. It'll continue. So this non-nil feeling now is available outside of it. So a little bit different than the if-let. The if-let says, okay, if we have this value, then you're going to be able to use it inside of here. So that's the idea. And then if it's not found, it does this default else case here down below. So that's the idea of the guardlet. Now the guardlet's actually, I think, really helpful for handling some base cases inside of your functions. So in this case, you're just handling right up front, get the feeling, because if you don't have the feeling, maybe there's nothing else left to do and you just have to safely return. The last thing you want, especially if you're writing a UI and a lot of this code is closer to the UI level for your users, the last thing you're going to want is to unsafely unwrap some of these values or maybe not handle some of these edge cases. And then you might be left in a strange state inside of your UI. I've seen programs crash because of that, because they're unsafely unwrapping things, because they say like, oh, the value is definitely going to always be there. But for some reason you used an optional, and what you really intended is that that value is missing. So you do have to handle that case. So that's what a lot of these language constructs are trying to help you do, is handle those off cases that you might not always be thinking about. So the language is there to help you with that. So let's take a look at a little bit further. It's just some extra tips on handling these optionals. So I talked about a lot of like dealing with the default case. So let me show you two things that I use very often inside my application programming. So the first one, let's just say we want to get a feeling. We have to have this feeling. Okay, we have to get it. And let's say we have a dog, okay, and then we tell it to get the current feeling. Now we know from before in the video that before a dog is created, and if it does not eat and you ask for the current feeling, there's nothing there. Well, let's just say in this case, we always know it's going to be nil, right? Because we know the implementation, but that's not always the case. So we use this double question mark here. Let me just expand this for a moment so you see them side by side. There we go. So double question mark. What this is doing, like the equivalent of this, is if let have to have this feeling equals dog current feeling. If we have it, we'll just say F feeling here. Then assign F to have to have this feeling, else assign F to the default feeling. It's kind of the same idea. It's the idea there. Another way to write that is you could just start by assigning it the default. So you have the default feeling, but if you find something else, you could reassign it then. So you reassign it to F, great, all good to go. So that's kind of what this is doing though. It's a little shorthand, and I use this quite often. There's definitely some API when dealing with iOS that require you to return a value or maybe require you to handle some sort of optional value. And you want to always stick with at least providing some sort of value. And the idea with Swift is to not use a lot of these optionals, only use them when they're actually meant to. And you don't want to just kind of just throw them everywhere because, you know, maybe you can't compile your program or something like that. You need to work ahead without having everything completed. The optionals are really there to help you with the actual meaning and the actual use case of a value actually not being there. So that's why I think this, they call it a nil coalescing operator, just automatically will give you a feeling if one can't be found on the left-hand side, and the one that you're given is the one that you provide, which is this default feeling here. Another way to write this, which I don't always do as I'm explaining this, but normally, especially if it's an enum, I'll just give the value right there. There's really no need to write it as a separate variable first and then put it afterwards. It can be all just declared inline like so. Now, just to hammer this point home, let's say it's arc, right? Because arc was defined earlier in our program, way up there. So arc's current feeling, but if he doesn't have one, then it's joy, and then we could print it out, right? So that's that. Let's take a look at then the map. So let's say, what's another dog we could have? Farouk, okay? So we have a dog, Farouk, right? And now we have a pack of dogs. And the pack of dogs will have Andrew, Arik, and Farouk. Okay? So that is our array of dogs. So let's just say, okay, now we want our all feelings. So we want all feelings from these people, or I'm sorry, from these dogs. So what we would do is we'd say, all right, take the pack, and we want to map, meaning transform each one of those items in pack to a feeling, and we can do that. We're going to feed them all the same food, or we could just ask what the current one is. So I'm just going to use the shorthand with the dollar syntax here and say, give me the current feeling. So now this actually results in an array of optional feeling. This might be good, this might not be. Then let's say you had to iterate through it, so you say, so for feeling in all feelings, see now the feeling here, if you want to print it out, so print feeling, you can't do that because it's optional. I guess good thing you wrote this function here to help with that, if there's a feeling missing or not. There's a couple other ways to handle this too, but you might be tempted to do if let non nil feeling. This always feels a little awkward to do, to have to iterate through a bunch of things and then only just to check if the element is actually there or not. So something I use to skip all of this here is actually use a really cool handy feature called the compact map. So the compact map, essentially what it does with your optionals is it just checks to see if something is there. If it is not there, it doesn't include it in the array. So if I was to say, give me the pack count here, okay, but then what is the all feelings count? It might actually be different because not all of the dogs in the pack could have a feeling. So let's just play it through. Let's just see what it says. All right, so 2, and then that's the count feeling, but we started with 3. So one of those dogs actually does not have a current feeling. So one of them didn't eat. I know right away that it's Farouk, but the whole point being that these dogs here, they all have a current feeling, or maybe they don't. Compact map takes out the ones that are nil, and then only gives me back the ones that are not nil. And now I have all these feelings of all the dogs. So that's the idea there. Now, one last thing I actually just thought of, another thing with optionals, and you might see this a lot, is you have a lot of dot syntax going from one type to another. You might actually run into this, and you're not really sure what it's called, but it's called optional chaining. So let me show you what that actually means. So if I have, let me go back up to the dog here. Let's just say something else. And there we go, that's an integer. And I'll just say it's always nil. So let's just go back to our feeling here. Let me erase this as our example. And if we want to get Farouk, current feeling, now we want to get to the next thing, like emoji here. We want to get the emoji of the current feeling for Farouk. Watch what happens. See, if I enter it in, Xcode, the text editor, is actually helping you and just like injecting the right syntax for you. That's what this question mark is doing. So this question mark, if it's not there, it's actually treating this as optional, and then dot, so like something on the optional type. But in this case, we want the actual wrapped value that's in the optional, so we have to use the question mark. So that's safely unwrapping it so that we can use it for the next part of our dot syntax. So here it's the current emoji, and then we could do a dot something like, I don't know, count how many characters are in the string. So we do a dot count, and then that's an integer. So now you can say a dot distance to, I don't know, another integer, and then dot something else. But the thing that you need to know here is that with all of these different dots, this special one here, if we don't have a current feeling, it actually doesn't execute the rest of the code. So let me show you another example. So we got the current feeling, right? So question mark dot. And then we have like just another integer here. Okay, now that might be nil too. So let's say we did have the current feeling, right? So we give Farouk, have him eat some sort of food. Let's give him candy, and then we know his feeling is going to be sick. And then he wants something else, and then he wants, I don't know, something else, like a distance to another integer here. So the current feeling would be there. So now it continues on and executes something else. But if something else returns nil, because it could, it's an optional type, then it's not going to execute anything to the right of that. So that is optional chaining. So it's chaining from one possible value, or maybe a value that's there or not there, and then moving on until it finds another value that's optional, and it could be there, could not be there. And it's kind of like doing this branch of like trying to see what kind of code you're executing. Up front, this doesn't look too difficult to maybe understand, but something to think about is that the return value of whatever this is, so like let's say we actually do get the distance. So I'll call this the final value. So what would this final value be? Well, it's whatever's on the farthest right to return. So this distance actually returns an integer. So this will be an integer. Now, because there's optional chaining, it actually does have the question mark that's there. So if we wanted to then safely unwrap it after that, we could do that. We could do an if let with it and do something here. Or maybe it's we want to take it and pass it to another function. Or maybe we want to do a guard let on it. We could do that too. And do something like that. Or if we just know that we want it to be just that final value, we could just say, okay, great, and then unsafely unwrap it at the end. Although, again, I wouldn't recommend doing that. But that's the optional chaining that you have also within Swift. So that's it. That's all we have for optionals. If you guys have any other questions or any other examples that you want me to walk through, just leave it in the comments below. If you have any other ideas of what other videos I could be posting or helping you guys learn, just let me know in the comments below as well. So thanks for watching. Have a good one.